And what I'm going to do is use my 17 minutes to share with you what we've been doing at One Laptop Per Child, but from a very different perspective than I normally can do, because normally I speak, or at least I have spoken at past TED meetings before we had enough machines out there. And now there's been enough evidence, and I will walk you through a lot of the projects very, very quickly, just to give you a feel for what's happening. Very few nonprofit organizations get to have their mission in their name. And so I don't need to tell you much about our mission. It's one laptop per child. And I will talk first about children, then a little bit about the industry, and then about ourselves, as I say, illustrated with a lot of examples. Now, I consider children a nation's most precious natural resource. And it's very interesting when I tell that to, let's say, a head of state, they say, oh, I never thought of it that way. I think of lumber or oil or maybe intellectual capital, but not necessarily children. There are 1.2 billion children in the world, and this is really primary school age children. 50% of them don't have electricity at home or at school. There are countries, I'll pick Afghanistan, where 25% of the teachers are illiterate. The next 25% are one grade ahead of the teacher. By that I mean they've had one grade more education than the teacher. And in that country, 50% of the children don't go to school, 75% of the girls don't go to school. So when you have a situation like that, it's not a matter of just automating school and putting computers in classrooms and trying to get a curriculum onto a computer. You have to do something very different. And you can't just, to be honest with you, build more schools and train more teachers, because that's going to take a very, very long time. So the question we asked ourselves is, could we do something different and in fact leverage children themselves? Could the children be active participants in whatever change we're making? Now, children very often in the developing world drop out of school not because they're needed in the fields to work, or not because the little girls have to take care of younger siblings, but because actually school is quite boring, or it's not particularly relevant. And very many kids go to school because they're told to, but really it's about rote learning. And you think rote learning is bad in this country. You should see what it's like in India and China and Africa and so on. It's really bad. And sort of these are places where the dependence on just sort of discipline and learning in that fashion is much, much higher than we have here. Now, the industry, if I really want to connect every child in the world and give them all a laptop, the industry 5, 6 years ago when we started was certainly not helping. It's an industry that has a DNA that is built on the fact that the cost of making electronics drops 50% every 18 months. Now, what do you do in an industry like that? What if this thing I'm holding in my hand, the electronics part of it, is going to cost 50% less in 18 months? What I better do over the 18 months is add more features to this, so that 18 months from now you'll pay roughly the same price, but it'll do more. Witness your cell phone, witness your laptops, and so on. I used to joke in the 1980s about the fact that every time that Intel made a faster processor, Microsoft used more of it. And then Intel made a faster processor, Microsoft used more of it. And had this little funny game going on. Well, it's not so funny, because what's happened, or at least happened until the early 2000s, is that everybody's laptop, to pick the particular example, was an SUV. That you were using more fuel to move this car, in this case this laptop, than the passenger. And it had become so self-serving that the fat lady couldn't sing anymore. That most of what was going on inside a laptop, which artificially kept the price very high, was in fact self-serving and gratuitous. And could we break that spell? Could we come in and say, stop, let's break that spell, make something that is much thinner, much leaner, and something that is designed from the bottom up for kids, Kids aren't office workers. They're not going to sit there doing PowerPoint and Excel. In fact, when a primary school child is taught PowerPoint or Excel, I consider that criminal. It's a criminal act because they don't need to be learning that stuff. They need to make things. They need to communicate with other children. They need to write programs. They need to do things that we call constructionist, but there are other simpler terms for it. And children are very, very good at teaching each other. But the industry didn't want to do that. The industry didn't want to make low-cost things. They didn't want to make things that you could throw on stages. Intel says they compete with me. Well, I'd like them to throw their laptops on the stage. Okay? The industry doesn't do that. They don't make something that works in the sun. They don't make something that you can hand crank. 50% of these kids don't have power. You can't plug that into the wall. You got to crank it by hand. You got to have a solar panel. You've got to do things very differently. Quick word about us, and then I'll take you on the tour, I promise. We are a nonprofit, but of a different sort. The word sustainable is not in our vocabulary. We're sort of more of a Big Bang theory. We aren't trying to continue. We live as a charity, none of this business model stuff, because what we want to do is have our mission be very clear. So it's not only a nonprofit, but we take zero. So when these laptops are in the field or they're sold, there is no margin that comes back to us. And people say, well, why don't you take a little margin? Well, the answer is, if I take any margin, the clarity of purpose is gone. I cannot look at somebody, a minister of education, and say, take 1 million of these because, by the way, I'm going to make $10 each. No, that's a very different discussion. So we, as an organization, had to be not only a nonprofit, but we don't follow the normal rules of sort of marketing and sort of self-sustainability. We support ourselves differently. And the reason that's important is because the numbers are huge. We did $200 million worth of laptops last year. Now, that's a relatively big number. I'd hoped it would be $1 billion. The point being that that is a different economy. Those people who pay for those don't want to be paying us 10% or 5% or whatever the number would be. So this is, and I'll walk you through countries, and they'll allow me to sort of remember different aspects. There'll be a slide somewhere that shows this, but we are in roughly 40 countries. And I picked this one to start. This is Peru. The president of Peru made a very important decision. He decided to do the laptops in the most remote regions of Peru, where they don't even speak Spanish. In some cases, it takes 4 and 5 days to get there. And what's happening in those villages is the kids are teaching their parents how to read and write, and their grandparents, as illustrated in this picture, how to read and write. That, to me, if that doesn't put goosebumps on your goosebumps, I don't have anything else to really show you. This is in India. Now, you know, one child dealing with one laptop is one kind of interaction. Not to take you through a lot of these, this is Nigeria, but it's more the collaborative part, multiple children interacting with each other, and, of course, multiple laptops. This is in India. This teacher had never, ever used a computer, always taught with the kids lined up very carefully. They came in, they sat there, and this is the way he teaches today. Now, our work goes back a long time. This isn't something we just started. I founded something called the Media Lab. We were doing this at the lab, and we were doing it before the lab. And here, this was in Senegal, and what we learned in 1982 is that these kids could play those keyboards like pianos. A lot of people said to me when I started this particular project, oh, Nicholas, you can't just give kids laptops and walk away. Well, guess what? You can. You actually can. And it's kind of, I'm not recommending it, but you can do it, and we do it in quite a few places. This is the school that sort of changed my attitude. My son was living in Italy at the time in sort of the year 2000. He was having girlfriend problems and sort of a startup company that didn't work. And I said, if you can suffer the indignity of working for your father, why don't you go to Cambodia and connect this school? And he put these laptops into that school in 2001, and it completely transformed the village. And it transformed the definition of childhood, because suddenly these children in the village weren't just the objects of teaching, that you taught them something, they were the agents of change. And that was sort of the profound difference. And I looked at this picture and I said, can this scale? Can we do this for 500 million kids? Can we do it for a very, very large number? And that's what started the project. And by being a nonprofit, we launched it with Kofi Annan in Tunis about 4.5 years ago. And in fact, there's a picture of the machine we were doing then. And this is a silly machine. We actually had a working prototype, but it was an important image. Everybody who saw this image remembered one thing from the image: the pencil yellow crank. Everybody remembered the crank. In fact, I still today go and people say, where's the crank? Where's the crank? And it's off, we have a crank, but it's a separate piece, like an AC adapter. But people remembered that image. Here now, sort of a little less than 5 years later, are sort of where we are, less than I had hoped. I had hoped we'd have more in the hands of kids. But what I hadn't anticipated is that the industry would then follow and the so-called netbook market emerged. And today, netbooks, in spite of industry, represent roughly 30% of the world market. So it would be a little bit like me coming to you 5 years ago and saying, I want to make an electric car, and I'm going to make my electric car, and while I may not sell 10 million electric cars, 1/3 of the production is electric cars. So by analogy, that's sort of what happened. This is the laptop, and only reason to step through it is that it is a games machine, it is an electronic book. Books are very important. And at the Boston Book Festival last fall, we announced 1.6 million books are available on this laptop free. Free. Okay. Now, to me, what's even more important is that you can put on a laptop, and I won't drop it again, it makes too much noise, you can put on a laptop really easily 100 books without taking much of the space, much of the memory. And so when you ship to a village 100 books in a laptop, that's kind of people say, okay, 100 books in a laptop, but I ship 100 laptops into a village, each one with 100 different books. So that's 10,000 books in that village. Okay, we didn't have 10,000 books. And because, and I won't give you, actually I'll show you the little ears. Everybody smiles when the little ears come up. Those little ears are antennae which connect the laptops to each other. So one kid wants a book on another kid's laptop. They're all connected. You don't need a cell phone tower. You don't need any of that stuff. They make the network. And that's very, very important. I'll just walk you through, again, some of the things that happened. Latin America for us is in some sense almost the easiest. If you look at the 50 poorest countries of the world, only one of them is in our region. It's Haiti, and of course it's had even more trouble recently. Peru has for us been very much a poster child. Colombia, we're starting, we have maybe a dozen schools. It's not as big as Peru or Uruguay, which is coming up next. This is a classroom in Uruguay. Teacher in this classroom heard that the laptops were coming. Uruguay's done every child in the country. Every single child has been done in Uruguay. And that's because the president said it would be his legacy and that it would be done in 18 months. The teacher in this classroom went to the Social Security office because she had been teaching for 30 years and says, I want early retirement. They said, come back in 4 weeks. Intervening period, the laptops arrived, and 2 days later, she went back to the Social Security office and asked for late retirement. So it takes no time. The energy in that classroom, people say, does this work? Does it work? Just come with me and step into the classroom for just 5 minutes and look at the energy in that classroom. and the kids teaching their parents how to read and write. What do you mean, does it work? Truancy, which averaged 40% in several, 35 to 40% in several of the countries that we went into, dropped to 0. So that's pretty important. I never thought getting on a postage stamp would be a goal, but we felt pretty good when we did. This is Rwanda. Rwanda is one of the 2 other countries that has pledged to do every single kid in the country, and there are more kids in Rwanda than there are in Uruguay. Uruguay is only 400,000 children. All of them have been done. Rwanda's 2.2 million, and they should have them done within the next 2 years. This is Mongolia. Mongolia is a challenge unto itself because it's not very dense, and it's not just nomadic, but the low density. Cambodia, this is the school I showed you in the beginning, and I'll raise this Thailand, more Thailand, India. Ethiopia, I was just there a couple of weeks ago. It's a huge country, 80 million people, and their language, Amharic, didn't even have a keyboard until we went, because there's no market for Amharic keyboards. Iraq, we're there, we're in Afghanistan, and so on. This is interesting. This is in Colombia. This is in the FARC region. If you just look at the gun on that guy's back, he's in fact, the kid is teaching the soldier. Now, I don't have time to go through the next generations. In fact, let me leave it on that picture. I just want to end in the 16 seconds I have with one sort of thing we learned while we were doing this, and sort of we've been rolling these out. And I used to tell people, and I still believe this, that the way to end poverty is education. And that as a consequence, since we are an education project, not a laptop project, that we are really in the business of ending poverty. Well, poverty is critical and is important, but there's something else, and I guess I just didn't see it quite as clearly as I do now, and that is there's something equally as bad as poverty, and that's isolation. And if you could end isolation for many of these kids in many of these parts of the world and parts of Afghanistan, northwest Pakistan, because isolation plus poverty is a deadly cocktail. And if you could end isolation and bring education, that's really the goal of one laptop per child. Thank you very much.